Louis pushed Franklin to switch from dealing weed to the coke business when we first met him. With his impulsive choices, Louis persuaded Jerome to assist his nephew by emphasizing that dealing cocaine only led to problems. While Franklin was locked, Louis grew the business. It was she who made the decision to separate and found her own empire. Fast forward to the final chapter of Snowfall's story, and Louis's ambition and chronic desire for satisfaction send all the characters over the edge. It's time to leave the country, travel to Jamaica, and escape the chaos, Jerome tells Louis as he abruptly ends the game due to an existential crisis. Jerome realizes that there is a limit to living on the streets and that his time is running out after Diane tells him that he is a dying species. He confesses that the only reason he's been in the game for so long is for Louis when he returns home with this inebriated statement, ready to put an end to the constant fighting with his family. He first appeals to her reason, pointing out how pointless this way of life is, before appealing to her emotions and jokingly asking if her love for him would be sufficient to convince her to change. It's not. Louis isn't sure if giving up is the best course of action for her, because she's so intent on achieving her goal that giving up now doesn't seem like a viable option. The next day, after Jerome has calmed down and Louis has had time to consider what her husband desires, they sit down and discuss the decision-making point they have reached. For the first time, we truly learn Louis' motivations and the internal conflict that has influenced her judgment. Being a black lady is not simple, and operating the drug trade is not any simpler. She claims that despite carrying the bulk of the workload and serving as the organization's brain, Jerome is the one whom people revere while they can only muster enough vigor to wink or lick their lips in her direction. Louis has had to battle for respect from the public and for her man even before they became drug lords. In the early seasons, even breaking up with Jerome wasn't enough to make him see her as his equal. She understands that her gender is still limiting her, despite the fact that she is seated on the summit. Louis responds that her self-worth is worth living or dying for in response to Jerome's question. Sadly, I believe Louis will replay this experience in her mind forever. Louis asks for more time to work things out with Teddy and get access to their money in Panama as their discussion with Jerome comes to a standstill. Jerome agrees to do one last drop with Teddy while Louis gets her mind right, but makes it obvious that regardless he's leaving. As the repercussions of the recent events continue, everyone is beginning to make plans for their safety and the future. Teddy, who is still in shock over his father's death, is forced to become a father for the first time and contact his ex-girlfriend to warn her that Franklin may be targeting them next. The loss of his father and the knowledge that the KGB and DEA are after him cause him to become more and more mentally unmoored. So, in an apparent move of both self-preservation and desperation, he launches a Hail Mary-style play. Before things spiral out of control, Teddy approaches Ruben's apartment in an effort to offer the KGB agent a way out. Teddy says in a strangely emotional exchange that he's felt less lonely ever since Ruben moved to town. Since I'm sure a spy or a CIA agent's existence is isolating and lonely, Teddy naturally sees himself in Ruben, even though it's all projection. However, it is insufficient to restrain Teddy's brutality. First, he declares that in theory, he has no plan in place, so maybe they can negotiate and figure out a way to walk away securely, avoiding their mutually assured destruction. But of course, for Teddy's selfish ass, this means Ruben lying to his bosses and running away with his lover, while Teddy continues to do whatever he's doing. Then, by threatening about Ruben if he doesn't cooperate, he weaponizes the happy ending that he had himself suggested. He says he will presume he desires his assistance if Ruben stays in the apartment for the next 24 hours, but if Ruben leaves, everything is up in the air. Teddy confides to Parissa that the next stage is to kill Franklin now that his plan to remove the KGB from the picture has been put into motion. Franklin, however, is always one step ahead. Franklin meets with those closest to him to determine how to proceed after killing his elderly father and effectively declaring war on Teddy. Leon steps in to keep a watch on Sissy and protect her after she rejects living in hiding once more because she is tired of all this mess. In return for cash and passports that Franklin needs to help him and his family escape, Franklin enlists Gustavo's assistance in finding Teddy, as well as a pledge to kill Teddy. Louis visits the stables to unwind with her horse, and Kane's men eventually catch her as everyone scrambles to plan their next moves. In order for Kane to terrorize the person who put him in the hospital, they kidnap her and keep her as a hostage. It quickly grows black. In essence, all of the discrimination Louis has experienced as a black woman is made worse by the torment Kane inflicts on her in order to find Teddy. While there is the typical violence in Snowfall, things quickly change, making it difficult to witness. As Franklin, whom Kane called, observes, he repeatedly kicks her in the stomach in an attempt to get her to give up Teddy before branding her like a piece of livestock. As if the brandings weren't enough to invoke the darkest ways black women have been persecuted, Kane arranges a group rape of Louis. He treats torturing Louis in a different way than he would a male equivalent. The planned sexual assault put things over the edge, even though the branding resembled practices used on black women in the antebellum period. Snowfall has never been this graphic, and it's unfortunate that a black lady who had just eloquently discussed feeling invisible was the victim of the violence. I question if the brandings alone would have been enough of a violation, let alone this level of violation. Even though it actually occurs in real life, I don't believe people needed to see her almost get gang raped. Louis deserved better. Franklin had a plan to warn Jerome without coming off as suspicious, so he watched his aunt being tortured calmly. Before anything worse could happen to Louis, Jerome, Leon, Scully, and Franklin reunite as friends and step in to save her. Kane challenges Jerome to move by holding Louis against his chest and pointing a gun at her head. Louis is able to avoid being hit because Jerome has an unfathomable amount of affection for his wife. Jerome initially appears to be all right, but it soon becomes clear that he is not, and he eventually collapses to the ground. Franklin yells in shock as Louis sobs over her deceased spouse, and they both come to terms with the seriousness of their loss. Adieu, Jerome, we will mourn him. Sincerely, I don't hold Cassandra responsible for attempting to separate Veronique from Franklin. You can tell she's learned a few things about parenting since her fallout with her daughter, as she acknowledged to Teddy's father. She offers to get Veronique and her unborn child out of there after witnessing Franklin's out-of-control violence, but Veronique chooses to stick by her partner. However, Veronique opted to stay because Franklin had more faith in her and had even given her the precise drop-off address. Now that Leon has returned from Africa, he has taken on a role as a neighborhood leader and peacemaker. He is taking action to make life better for everyone with a more evolved mindset. In a cleverly planned scene, Leon answers a call from Franklin as he is having his hair cornrowed. He stands in front of the mirror, his hair divided in two to represent the revolutionary inside him and the gangster he has become. While the side with the cornrows holds the phone to his ear as he follows Franklin's instructions, calling him back to violence, the side with the afro confronts the mirror, revealing his true nature. It's fantastic. I find Teddy and Parissa's little affair annoying. He has a whole kid that he abandoned, so I find it offensive that he claimed she was the only source of happiness in his life. I want him to just step up on his own, because all of his decisions have been driven by the desire to impress others, whether it was his dad, his boss, or Parissa. With Concrete Jungle coming to a close, the adage, lives have been lost, and their family will never be the same, only becomes more accurate. You can definitely believe that pain, guilt, and retaliation will keep her in the game if Louis' desire for greater respect and recognition was what kept him there in the first place. There are only 4 episodes remaining in the season, so it won't be long before we find out how things turn out before Louis is truly content and happy enough to leave.